Now, we'll go from musical dialogue to a conversation about food culture in America as a way to break down barriers between people who may have great differences. We're opening our first session today titled Omni-American Culture, Not Race, with an interview by author and psychologist Pamela Paresky of her friend, the chef and television personality Andrew Zimmern. As we listen to their discussion, recall that the Omni-American idea is about both the many who contribute to the diversity of American life and the potential unity of Americans based on a shared striving to achieve her ideals. Please take it away, Pamela.
Thank you, Lauren. Andrew, as Americans, how can we use food and food culture to acknowledge and appreciate differences while understanding that we're Omni-Americans? We're all part of a larger us.
To your question about food, food is can be the great uniter. Food, music, sports, arts, things that bring us together can help us to have a conversation, to literally be at the table together, if we so choose, but also to understand things. Let's talk about America and what makes us less worthy of starting this conversation in a sense than I wish we were. We, as Americans, we devour other cultures first through our mouths, right? We fall in love with Mexican food before we fall in love. I'm talking about as in general terms. Before we fall in love with Mexican art or Mexican music, and certainly before Mexican people, which is the harmful part of this. The Mexican food is held on high in all 50 states. I've been to Alaska and had incredible Mexican food. They have Mexican food nights in research centers in the Arctic Circle. I've been there, and yet when you start to talk to people about other aspects of culture, when you start talking about people, the world is not made up of food, right? It's the most important thing the world is made up of is people. So when you ask, how can food help us advance this idea of coming together and understanding our omniculturalism, our omni-racism, when we want to talk about omni-Americanism, I think food can do that, right? We've seen it before with different foods. Let's just stick with the Mexican, Tex-Mex food, which is its own legitimate food culture. Right? Everyone would acknowledge that. It's historically proven. Texas was part of Mexico. And when the lines got drawn and the state of Texas became part of the United States, a food was created when more white Europeans came in, and the vaqueros, many of which went back south of the border, many stayed. Obviously, southern Texas especially has an extremely large Mexican-American population. It's such an important part of the culture down there to realize that there is Tex-Mex food, there is Mexican food, and they are both, they both need to be honored.
But you've also talked about how we appreciate food and food culture and how that gives us an access. You talk a lot about food and food culture and how that gives us an access to understanding a people and a culture, and to appreciate not just their differences, but how like in Texas,
our similarities
but also being able to borrow without appropriating,
Correct. As long as you honor
borrow.
Yeah, well, as long as you honor where it's come from, as long as you cite reference, right? I mean, you would never, cop an idea from someone else and throw it in a book and not give reference to it. That's called stealing. And it's the same thing with food and culture, right? We have to honor where it's came from. The first part of what you said is, in fact, that other side of the solution, which is it should be apparent to everyone when we sit down and eat that all of our food comes from somewhere else. All of our food has gone through lenses and filters and generational impact, right? And very rarely is it equal and held identical to the original thing from 300 years ago. It is important that we all realize that food can change. But because of that, food is that communal touchstone. If we are from different places with different ideas and differing opinions about race, culture, politics, religion, sex, all of that, right? And we are diametrically opposed on those issues. We can come together and share a meal and share a common opinion about something and its deliciousness, and sit there and say, well, you know something? Our little Venn diagram just overlapped another inch. And if we can find some common attitudes and admiration, love and respect for the food of a culture, maybe we can argue less about the culture, the color of the skin, the language, who you love, all that other stuff, and we can start to dive into some of those issues. I firmly believe that food can be the great equalizer that way, not only as we break bread, because it brings people together in a friendly and non-combative way, so it's a tool, but the actual study of food, because of the way it moves around the world. You talk of appropriation. Would the Italians be okay with Marco Polo never having brought pasta or noodle making out of China to Italy? I'm not sure, but it's a fascinating thing. You know, foods that have come from the Spice Islands, the first peoples of the Americas had trade routes by foot that wove their way all the way around North America, from the Taos Pueblo all the way up into what is modern day Canada and up into Alaska. I mean, it is incredible when you look back at the way food and people and ideas have traveled over the years. The spice route that Marco Polo actually helped show where this was, linking Asia and Europe. We have always been inexorably linked.
You mentioned sitting down and breaking bread, which it makes me think that there are two avenues in a way. One is that sitting down and breaking bread is a way of acknowledging that we recognize the other person as a human being, you know, that we recognize the other person's equal dignity by sitting down and having a meal with them. Right now, we have such division that people would refuse to sit at the same table as somebody, to break bread with somebody. And so rather than using the fact that we're already eating with somebody as an acknowledgement that we recognize their equal dignity, perhaps people could make more of an effort to sit down and break bread with people with whom they disagree as an effort to, you know, recognize their equal dignity.
Meals and the actual act of breaking bread is a very, very, very powerful mechanism for understanding. And the study of food is also a very, very, very powerful mechanism for understanding how ideas and opinions flow around the world by exploring something that we all like to do, which is eat. And I believe if we can explore some of those ideas and how food moves, we might better understand how other ideas that are not so easy to talk about, ones about the color of our skin, who we choose to love, what God we choose to worship or concept we choose to worship, might be a little easier, and we might find a greater level of understanding.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you.